Hey everyone, Sarah here. Rewind Justice brings you revenge stories that will blow your mind. If you're ready, hit subscribe and let's go.
The thing about being underestimated is that it gives you the most valuable currency in business. Time. Time to build. Time to strategize. Time to position yourself exactly where you need to be before anyone realizes what you've done. My name is Marcus Chin, and for the past 8 years my family has considered me a failure. Not a struggling entrepreneur. Not someone finding their path. A failure. The kind of disappointment that gets brought up at every holiday gathering, every family dinner, every casual conversation that needs a punchline. My father, Robert Chin, built Riverside Automotive from a single repair shop into a regional chain of 17 dealerships across 3 states. He's the kind of man who wakes up at 5 a.m., works until 9 p.m., and considers anything less than 70-hour weeks to be laziness. My older brother, David, followed perfectly in his footsteps. MBA from Wharton, Vice President of Operations by 32, Dad's chosen successor. Then there was me. I graduated with a degree in finance and immediately disappointed everyone by not joining the family business. Instead, I took a position as a junior analyst at a small investment firm that nobody had heard of. The pay was modest. The office was in a converted warehouse. My title was intentionally vague. Investment analyst, Dad had sneered when I told him. So you're going to play with other people's money and take a percentage. Real entrepreneurial, Marcus. What he didn't know, what nobody knew, was that the small investment firm was actually a boutique private equity fund that I'd co-founded with 2 former MIT classmates. We specialized in one thing: providing strategic capital to family-owned businesses looking to expand but unwilling to give up control to traditional venture capital. We were silent partners. Anonymous investors. The people who made growth possible while staying completely invisible. And we were very, very good at it. By year 3, our fund was managing $140 million in assets. By year 5, we'd successfully exited from 8 investments with an average return of 340%. By year 7, I personally controlled a portfolio worth just over $50 million, with another $200 million under management. I lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment. I drove a 7-year-old Honda. I wore clothes from Target. Every family gathering, I endured the same questions, the same concerned looks, the same thinly veiled contempt. Still at that little investment place? Have you thought about something more stable? Your cousin Jennifer just bought her 3rd property. David's being considered for the Inc. 500 list. I smiled. I nodded. I said things like, I'm happy with my path, and money isn't everything, and let them draw their own conclusions. Because here's what they didn't understand. I wasn't hiding my success out of shame. I was protecting it. The moment my family knew I had money, I would become an ATM. A backup plan. A safety net for every bad decision and failed venture. More importantly, I was watching. Waiting. Learning exactly how my father operated his business, what mistakes he made, where his blind spots were. And then, 18 months ago, I saw my opportunity. Dad had been talking about expansion for years. He wanted to break into the luxury vehicle market. Open 5 new dealerships specializing in high-end European brands. Mercedes. BMW. Porsche. The kind of showrooms that required massive upfront capital, premium real estate, and relationships with manufacturers who didn't give franchises to just anyone. The project was ambitious. The numbers were staggering. Total cost, $47 million. Dad had approached traditional banks. They'd offered loans with crushing interest rates and terms that would have put Riverside Automotive at serious risk. He'd talked to venture capital firms who wanted 40% equity and board seats. He'd even considered taking the company public, which would have meant losing the family control he'd spent 30 years building. He was stuck. That's when my partner, Jennifer Liu, brought the opportunity to our fund's weekly meeting. Riverside Automotive, she said, pulling up the financials on screen. Regional chain, solid reputation, excellent cash flow. Owner is Robert Chin, looking for $9.4 million to fund the first phase of a luxury expansion. He's already secured the manufacturer agreements and found the real estate. He just needs capital. I'd stared at those spreadsheets for a long moment. What's he offering? I asked. Standard terms. Silent partnership, no equity stake, 8% annual return, 5-year term. He maintains complete operational control. We're literally just the money. Robert Chin, my other partner Marcus Williams, had said slowly. Any relation? My father. The room went quiet. Jennifer had leaned forward. Marcus, you've been clear about keeping your family separate from the fund. If you want to pass on this. No, I'd interrupted. Run the numbers. If the deal makes sense, we do it. I don't let personal feelings interfere with good business. The truth was, the deal was exceptional. Dad had done everything right. The market research, the location analysis, the manufacturer relationships. He just needed capital from someone who wouldn't try to control him. We structured the investment through 3 layers of corporate entities. The money would come from Cascade Financial Partners, which was owned by Redwood Holdings Group, which was owned by our fund. My name appeared nowhere. Just signatures from our corporate attorneys and wire transfers from business accounts. Dad never had any idea his youngest son, the disappointment, the one without a real job, was funding his dream expansion. The paperwork was signed in March. The money transferred in April. By June, construction had begun on the first dealership. By September, the showroom opened to incredible success. I watched it all from a distance. Saw the press releases. The local news coverage. The Incorporated magazine profile. Robert Chen's luxury gamble pays off. At family dinners, Dad talked endlessly about his brilliant strategy, his careful planning, his ability to find the right financial partners who understood his vision. Not like these vulture capitalists, he'd say. My partners trust me. They know quality when they see it. I'd nod and eat my mashed potatoes and let him think whatever he wanted. David started getting more aggressive in his condescension around month 6. So Marcus, still analyzing investments? He'd asked at a Sunday dinner. When are you going to actually do something? Make something? Build something real? I'm content, I'd replied. Content, he'd repeated, laughing. Dad's opening his 3rd luxury dealership next quarter, and you're content with your analyst job. That's the difference between ambition and mediocrity. Mom had tried to soften it. Marcus is finding his way. Not everyone needs to follow the same path. He's 34 years old, Dad had said flatly. At his age, I had 3 dealerships and a growing family. He's got what? A rental apartment and a Honda. The comments escalated over the months. My cousin Jennifer, different Jennifer, made partner at her law firm. Uncle Thomas's daughter bought her 2nd investment property. David got written up in the business journal. Me. I was just Marcus. The one who never quite figured it out. The disappointing son who was probably going to end up asking for help eventually. Then came Thanksgiving. The dinner was at my parents' house. A sprawling 5-bedroom colonial that Dad had bought during Riverside's first major expansion. 42 people crammed around extended tables. The usual suspects. My parents, David and his wife Jessica, my 3 uncles and their families, cousins ranging from 23 to 47. I'd arrived exactly on time, wearing a sweater from Old Navy and carrying a store-bought pie. Marcus. Mom had hugged me. I'm so glad you made it. Wouldn't miss it, I'd replied. Dad had nodded from his position at the head of the table. David had smirked. My cousin Brad had immediately cornered me with questions about whether I was still doing that investment thing. We'd made it through appetizers and salad without incident. Dad talked about the dealerships. Uncle Mike talked about his construction company's latest project. Aunt Sarah's husband discussed their upcoming cruise. Then came the turkey. Dad had stood to carve, playing the patriarch role he loved so much. Before we eat, I just want to say how grateful I am for this family. For everyone's success. For the next generation stepping up. He gestured to David. David's been instrumental in our expansion. Couldn't have done it without him. David had nodded graciously. And Jennifer, my cousin the lawyer, making partner at 36. Incredible. More nods. More smiles. Brad's company just landed that contract with the state. Thomas's son got accepted to medical school. He'd gone around the table cataloging achievements, building to something. Then his eyes landed on me. Marcus, he'd said. When will you get a real job? The table went quiet. I have a job, I'd replied calmly. An investment analyst, Dad had said. At what? Some no-name firm in a warehouse? Your cousin just made vice president at a Fortune 500 company. Jennifer's making $400,000 a year. David's running a $200 million operation. Total disappointment, Uncle Mike had muttered, just loud enough to be heard. Uncle Thomas had nodded. At some point, Marcus, you have to ask yourself if you're really trying. David had leaned back in his chair. Maybe he's just not built for success. Some people aren't. It's not an insult, it's just reality. Mom had started to object, but Dad had waved her off. I'm serious, Marcus. When are you going to do something real? Build something? Make an actual impact instead of just existing. I'd sat there, fork in hand, looking at my father, and my brother, at my uncles and cousins and their satisfied, pitying faces. And I'd made a decision. I pulled out my phone, opened my encrypted messaging app, typed a single message to Jennifer Liu: freeze all funding for Riverside Automotive Expansion Project. Effective immediately. Trigger the 90-day notice clause. Then I'd set my phone down, picked up my fork and taken a bite of turkey. This is really good, Mom, I'd said. 30 seconds later, Dad's phone rang. He'd glanced at the screen, frowned. I need to take this. It's the bank. He'd stepped away from the table, walked into his office, closed the door. The table had resumed normal conversation. David had started telling a story about a difficult customer. Aunt Sarah had asked about someone's vacation plans. I'd eaten my turkey and waited. 3 minutes later, Dad's office door had opened. His face was pale. Robert. Mom had asked. What's wrong? I need. He'd looked around the table. I need to make some calls. There's the expansion funding. There's a problem. What kind of problem? David had asked. The financial partner. They're freezing the funds. Triggering the early termination clause. The table had gone silent. What? David had stood up. Why? What did you do? Nothing. Dad had snapped. The bank president just called. Said Cascade Financial Partners sent formal notice this morning. They're pulling out of the entire deal. Can they do that? Uncle Mike had asked. Apparently. There's a 90-day notice provision in the contract. If they invoke it, they can withdraw all committed capital for future phases. David had grabbed the phone. How much are we talking? $9.4 million, Dad had said quietly. 4 phases 2 and 3. The showrooms we were supposed to break ground on in January. Jesus Christ, David had muttered. Why now? What changed? I don't know. Dad had looked genuinely shaken. Mark, the bank president, said it came from their investment committee. No explanation. Just formal notice that they're exercising their contractual right to terminate. I'd taken another bite of turkey. Mom had touched Dad's arm. Can you find other investors? In 90 days? For a project this size. Dad had sunk into his chair. The manufacturer agreements are contingent on the timeline. If we miss the January deadline, we lose the franchises. 2 years of work. Gone. The table had erupted into overlapping conversations. Aunt Sarah asking questions. Uncle Thomas offering to make calls. David already on his phone, presumably texting attorneys. I'd quietly stood up, walked to the kitchen and started making a plate of leftovers. Mom had followed me. Marcus, are you okay? I'm fine, I'd said. Just getting some pie. Your father didn't mean. Yes, he did. I'd looked at her. He's meant it every time. And that's okay. He's entitled to his opinion. She'd hugged me. You're doing fine. You don't need to prove anything. I know, I'd replied. What I didn't say, I'd already proven everything. They just didn't know it yet. The next 72 hours were chaos that I watched from a comfortable distance. Dad called emergency meetings with his attorneys. David spent 14-hour days trying to find replacement investors. They approached every bank, every private equity firm, every high-net-worth individual they knew. The problem was simple. Nobody else would offer terms as favorable as Cascade Financial Partners had. Every alternative came with equity stakes, board seats, or interest rates that would cripple the business. Dad had lucked into an extraordinary deal. Silent money, fair returns, zero interference. And he'd never questioned why someone would offer such generous terms. Because he'd never imagined his disappointment of a son was on the other end of the wire transfers. Day 4 my phone rang. David. Marcus. Hey. I know this is. Look, I need a favor. What kind of favor? Dad's expansion deal fell through. The investors backed out. We need bridge capital while we find replacement funding. Just $200,000 for 60 days. I'll pay you 10% interest. I'd let the silence stretch. You want to borrow $200,000 from me? I know it's a lot, but you work in finance. You must have some savings or access to. David, you just spent Thanksgiving dinner calling me a disappointment who's never built anything real. Look, family is family. Can you help or not? No. Just like that. Good luck with the funding search. I'd hung up. Uncle Mike called next. Then Uncle Thomas. Both with versions of the same request. Could I leverage any relationships at my little investment firm to help Dad find investors? I'd politely declined each time. The family group chat, which I'd muted years ago, apparently exploded with messages about my selfishness. How I couldn't even make a few calls to help my own father. How this just proved what kind of person I really was. I'd ordered Thai food and watched Netflix. Week 2, the manufacturer agreements started falling apart. Mercedes-Benz sent formal notice that if construction didn't begin by January 15th, the franchise rights would be revoked. BMW followed 3 days later. Dad aged 5 years and 10 days. The local business community started asking questions. Articles appeared in the trade publications. Riverside automotive expansion hits unexpected roadblock. Robert Chen's luxury gamble faces funding crisis. David called me again. Marcus, I'm begging you. Just talk to your firm. See if they'd consider the investment. We'll pay any reasonable rate. Why would they invest? I'd asked. Because it's a good deal. The numbers work. Someone already vetted this and agreed to fund it. And then they changed their mind. Marcus. I don't mix family and business, David. You taught me that. Remember? At that dinner when you said I'd never be a real businessman because I was too emotional. Silence. Good luck, I'd said and disconnected. Week 3, Dad did something I'd never seen him do. He called me to apologize. Marcus. I'm sorry about Thanksgiving. What I said was out of line. Okay. I've been under a lot of stress with the expansion and I took it out on you. That wasn't fair. I appreciate that. Listen, I know you work in the investment world. Even if it's entry-level, you must know people. Wealthy people. Investors. I need help, son. This expansion, if it falls through, it could damage everything I've built. I'd walked to my window, looked out at the city lights. What would you need? $9.4 million to complete phases 2 and 3. Or even just $5 million to secure one location and keep the Mercedes agreement alive. That's a significant amount of capital. I know. But the returns are there. I've got all the documentation. Market analysis. Profit projections. The first showroom is already exceeding expectations. Send me the information, I'd said. I'll look at it. You will. Hope had flooded his voice. Marcus, if you could just make some introductions. I'll review the materials and let you know if I can help. He'd sent everything within an hour. 37 documents. Financial statements, market research, manufacturer agreements, architectural plans. I'd reviewed them carefully, even though I'd already seen every page months ago when our fund had done the original due diligence. Then I'd sent them to Jennifer Liu with a note. Thoughts? Her response came back in 10 minutes. Same opportunity we already funded. Strong fundamentals. Expansion plan is solid. Client is difficult but manageable. Why are we looking at this again? I'd smiled and typed, just confirming my assessment. Schedule the reinstatement meeting for next week. The meeting took place at Cascade Financial Partners' downtown office. Not the converted warehouse where I'd told my family I worked, but the actual professional suite we'd moved into 3 years ago. 20th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Conference room that seated 20. I'd invited Dad, David, and their attorney. They'd arrived 15 minutes early, looking nervous. Jennifer Liu had greeted them. Mr. Chin, thank you for coming. I'm Jennifer Liu, managing partner. Thank you for seeing us, Dad had said. I understand Cascade withdrew from our expansion funding. We're hoping to understand why and potentially restructure the agreement. Of course. Let's go to the conference room. My partner will join us shortly. She'd led them down the hall, offered coffee, made small talk about the impressive office space. We've grown quite a bit in recent years, Jennifer had said. Started in a warehouse, now managing just over $200 million in assets across 14 active investments. Impressive, David had replied. And your partner? The door had opened. I'd walked in wearing a tailored Tom Ford suit, carrying the Riverside Automotive file and taken the seat at the head of the table. Good morning, Dad. David. The color had drained from both their faces. Marcus. Dad had half stood from his chair. What are you doing here? I'm the founding partner of Cascade Financial Partners, I'd replied calmly. I'm also the primary investment manager for the Riverside Automotive account. Jennifer, could you pull up the original agreement? She clicked a remote. The presentation screen had displayed the signature page from March. Cascade Financial Partners had signed on one line. Below it, in smaller text, authorized by Marcus Chin, managing partner. You. David had whispered. You're the investor? The fund is the investor, I'd corrected. I'm one of 3 managing partners. We have a committee-based decision structure. Dad had sunk back into his chair. You've been funding my expansion? The fund has been providing capital pursuant to a mutually agreed-upon contract. Yes. Why didn't you tell me? You never asked. You also never asked what I actually do for work. You simply assumed I was failing and treated me accordingly. The attorney had cleared his throat. Mr. Chin. Marcus. Can you explain why the funding was frozen? I'd opened the file. Clause 14, subsection C. Either party may terminate future funding commitments with 90 days' notice if material circumstances change. We exercised that clause. What circumstances changed? David had demanded. Our investment committee determined that the relationship had become untenable. Because of Thanksgiving? Dad's voice cracked. Because I questioned your career? No. Because for 8 years, you've treated me with contempt while I've quietly funded your dream. That's not a sustainable partnership dynamic. Jennifer had pulled up another slide. However, we've reviewed the project fundamentals. The expansion plan remains sound. Riverside Automotive has been an exemplary client in terms of meeting obligations and executing strategy. Then why pull out? The attorney had asked. We haven't, I'd said. We've frozen future commitments pending restructure of the relationship terms. I'd slid a new contract across the table. Same capital. Same timeline. Same terms. One addition. The identity of the funding partner will be disclosed to key stakeholders. No more anonymous silent partnership. Dad had picked up the contract with shaking hands. You want me to tell people that my son is my investor? I want you to acknowledge reality, I'd replied. I've built a $50 million personal portfolio and a $200 million fund. I've successfully exited from 8 investments with exceptional returns. I've made it possible for you to pursue your luxury expansion without giving up equity or control. That's not failure. That's not disappointment. That's success by any objective measure. Marcus, I don't need your approval anymore, Dad. I stopped needing that years ago. But I will not continue being treated like a charity case at family dinners while I'm literally funding your ambitions. David had found his voice. So this is revenge. You're going to destroy Dad's business because we hurt your feelings. I'm not destroying anything. I'm offering the same deal with one modification. Sign it or don't. You have 90 days to find alternative funding if you prefer. The room had gone silent. Dad had looked at the contract. At me. Jennifer. If I sign this, what changes? You tell the family what I actually do. You stop questioning my career choices. You treat me with the same respect you'd give any successful business partner. That's it. The money flows exactly the same. And if I don't sign? You have 74 days remaining to secure $9.4 million in funding with comparable terms. Based on David's conversations with other investors over the past 3 weeks, I estimate your chances of success at approximately 12%. I'd stood up. Take the weekend. Discuss it with your attorney. Jennifer will be your point of contact. Going forward. Gentlemen. I'd walked out of the conference room and back to my office. Through the glass wall, I'd watched Dad sit there staring at the contract. David had paced. The attorney had made notes. Jennifer had joined me 20 minutes later. That was ice cold, she'd said. Was it wrong? No. It was perfect. The look on their faces when you walked in. She'd smiled. So are they going to sign? Yes. How do you know? Because Dad's not stupid. He built a successful business by making smart decisions. This is a smart decision. His ego just needs a few days to process. She'd been right. The contract came back signed on Monday morning. The next family dinner happened 3 weeks later. Sunday. Mom's house again. I'd arrived in my usual Old Navy sweater, driving my usual Honda. But this time when Dad stood to make his announcements, something was different. Before we eat, I have some news about the expansion. Phases 2 and 3 are moving forward. Construction begins next month. Applause around the table. I also want to acknowledge someone who made this possible. Our primary investor and financial partner. Someone who believed in this project from the beginning and structured a deal that let us maintain family control while pursuing growth. He'd looked at me. Marcus has built one of the most successful boutique investment funds in the region. His firm manages over $200 million in assets. And he's been the silent partner behind our expansion since day one. The table had gone completely quiet. Uncle Mike's fork had actually dropped. David had stared at his plate. I owe my son an apology, Dad had continued. I let assumptions and appearances cloud my judgment. I questioned his success while he was actively enabling mine. That was wrong. Mom had tears in her eyes. Brad had spoken first. Wait, you're an investor? Like a real investor? I'm a founding partner of a private equity fund, I'd replied. We provide growth capital to family-owned businesses. How much do you manage? Personally, about $50 million. The fund manages $200 million total. Jennifer, the cousin, had laughed. And we've been feeling sorry for you. I know. Why didn't you say anything? Aunt Sarah had asked. Because wealth isn't something I need to advertise. I'm comfortable. I'm successful. That's enough. David had finally looked up. The firm we couldn't reach for 3 weeks. That was you. That was our fund's standard communication protocol during due diligence periods. You let me beg you for money. You called me a disappointment who'd never built anything real. 2 days later you asked to borrow $200,000. Yes, I declined. Jesus Christ, Marcus. Dad had raised his glass. To Marcus. And to the lesson that success isn't always visible, but it's always valuable. They'd toasted. I'd smiled politely and taken a sip of wine. 6 months later, the second luxury dealership opened. The third followed in August. Dad's expansion was a massive success. The luxury division generated $40 million in revenue in year 1. Forbes ran a feature. He won regional business awards. Every article mentioned the strategic partnership with Cascade Financial Partners. My name appeared in half of them. David and I developed a cordial working relationship. Not warm but professional. He ran operations. I provided capital when needed. We stayed in our lanes. The family stopped asking when I'd get a real job. Uncle Mike actually apologized, genuinely apologized, for calling me a disappointment. Cousin Jennifer asked me to review her investment portfolio. Brad requested an introduction to our fund for a friend's startup. And Dad started ending our phone calls with, I'm proud of you, son. I still drive the Honda. Still live in the 2-bedroom apartment. Still wear clothes from Target most days. Because here's what I learned. Validation from others is nice, but it's not necessary. I built something real. I created value. I succeeded by my own metrics. The fact that it took my family 8 years to notice says more about their perception than my reality. I don't need them to understand what I've built. I just needed them to stop questioning it. And now finally they have. The turkey at Thanksgiving tastes a lot better when you're not defending your entire existence between courses.